This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Gorchow. Cheyna, when it comes to important and sometimes under-the-radar state government functions, as you were just discussing, the Public Service Commission in Michigan pretty much defines that phrase. But in the past few weeks, the palace intrigue involving the three-member board that regulates the state's public utilities, principally Consumers Energy and DTE Energy, has reached a fever pitch, hasn't it?
Yeah, so let's zoom out here because I'm sure plenty of people are just scratching their heads while they listen to this. I think it's safe to say that most people have no idea what the Public Service Commission is. I personally didn't know about it until I became a reporter a million years ago. Unless, of course, they also work in the energy field or advocate in the energy field. So you said this is a 3-person panel. How did they get on said panel?
So these are appointments by the governor of the state for 6-year terms.
And there are something like 400 state boards and commissions, some of which don't exactly scream power, like the Blueberry Commission and the Cherry Committee. Delicious. Though, to be clear, we love our Michigan-grown blueberries and cherries here at MichMash. So what's special about the Public Service Commission, which for brevity, we will now refer to as the PSC?
So, Cheyna, the commission has real power, unlike the aforementioned blueberry and cherry panels. For starters, consumers, DTE, and other private utilities cannot raise rates on their customers without PSC approval. Second, utilities have to file plans subject to PSC review outlining how they intend to meet long-term capacity needs. Third, it can order the utilities to take actions to assure reliability. Fourth, it's a public body where members of the public can voice their concerns and opinions about how the state should regulate its utilities. Fifth, it controls siting decisions on utility-scale solar and wind energy. Sixth, yes, there is a sixth. Stay with me. These are full-time jobs that pay well, not just your, run-of-the-mill volunteer board assignment. And finally, it may be a 3-member commission, but it's really a de facto state department with about 200 employees. The chair of the commission functions essentially as the department director.
Whew. That's a lot. That was 7. But typically we don't hear much about the PSC, except when there's been, a massive power outage and residents endure sometimes more than a week without power and use the commission to vent their rage. So what's happening now?
So appointments are for 6-year terms, like I mentioned earlier. In 2023, one of Governor Gretchen Whitmer's appointees to the commission resigned after 4 years on the job. So that creates an opening. Whitmer appoints Alessandra Carrion to fill the vacancy and the remainder of the term, which expired just this past July. Carrion had a different background than your typical PSC appointee, most of whom have worked in the finance field or the energy industry or even on the PSC staff. Ordinarily, Whitmer reappointing Carrion to a full 6-year term would have been automatic, but that turned out not to be the case.
And this is where it gets murky. Our friend Craig Mauger from the Detroit News wrote a story in June suggesting Whitmer could replace Carrion on the PSC. He cited several unnamed sources that the utilities were unhappy with Carrion and an organization of clean energy businesses that typically is in sync with Whitmer voiced public disappointment at the possibility. Lo and behold, Whitmer did indeed replace Carrion, though she provided Carrion with a soft landing, naming her the state's new chief climate officer in a different department.
Cheyna, it's still unclear why the governor replaced Carrion. She hasn't taken question from reporters in the 2 weeks since she announced the appointment of Shaquila Myers to fill the vacancy. The governor's press office has refused to answer questions about why Whitmer didn't reappoint Carrion, saying only that she takes the appointments process seriously. And there's nothing that's come out of these PSC meetings, which we do cover regularly here at Gongwer, that suggests there was some type of a break between Carrion and the other 2 commissioners, who are also Whitmer appointees. Far from it. We're going to talk more about Shaquila Myers in a moment, but we need to first discuss how politically powerful consumers and DTE are.
Right. These are entities known for making large contributions through their political action committees to legislators and the governor, no matter the person or the party. They also use nonprofit funds to influence campaigns. The key for them is whether a candidate supports Michigan's regulated utility structure that preserves their territorial dominance, and they would say we should note their ability to adequately serve customers. Candidates who favor a deregulated market that would allow for greater competition, the utilities have demonstrated they would spend heavily to keep those folks out of state government or drive them out if they are already there.
Cheyna, the utilities know the game and they play it really well. They identify allies and will spend to help them win. And they emphasize issues to help these candidates that the utilities feel will move the needle, and those are not necessarily energy issues. For example, in the 2020 primary election, a group affiliated with utility ran an ad extolling their favored candidate in a Republican primary as someone who defends Christian values. Obviously not an energy issue. Then in a Democratic primary, hundreds of miles away, they ran a different ad talking up a Democratic candidate as having worked for President Obama. Again, not about energy. Listeners are probably thinking, make it make sense. That's really confusing, and I understand it. But the utilities take a whatever it takes to win approach.
The governor and the utilities historically have seen eye to eye. After severe storms in 2021 left some areas of the state without power for extended periods, I believe I was one of them, some Democrats wanted to go scorched earth on DTE. That was not Whitmer's approach. She asked the PSC to take a series of actions in response, but pointedly thanked the utilities for their efforts.
So this brings us to the person I mentioned earlier, newly named Public Service Commission Commissioner Shaquila Myers. She comes straight out of the executive office of the governor, where she was a senior advisor. In fact, this was her second stint at the upper echelons of Whitmer's team. In between, she was chief of staff to the Democrat who was Speaker of the House in 2023 and 2024, State Representative Joe Tate, who was also seen as pro-utility.
Replacing Carrion, who was a newcomer to state government, with Myers was pretty clearly a move by the governor and her team to put a loyalist in place on the commission. And that's really no surprise. I mean, this is the governor's administration. Governors don't put people out of sync with their philosophy and approach in their administration. I don't care who that governor is. Nonetheless, there are a lot of raw feelings here. Zach, break those down.
So, yes, I think number one, again, there's been no explanation for this, and Carrion's tenure ended up being so short. It's really unusual. So, earlier this week, the Detroit News quoted former state representative Rachel Hood and 3 unnamed House Democrats slamming Myers. Remember, these are all Democrats we're talking about, as someone who would do the utilities bidding. Myers declined to comment for the story, and the governor's office didn't really say much about the allegations in the story. But oh my goodness, the next morning, Myers was clearly really steamed about what Hood and the others said. She took to Facebook and unloaded. I had a source text me a couple screenshots of what she posted, and it really had flames coming off of it. She didn't name Hood, but it seemed pretty clear she had Hood in mind when she said Myers would not let people who were, quote, too lazy or too incompetent to do their jobs just tear down my hard work with innuendo and speculation, unquote. And there were other barbs after that. My goodness, what a mess.
It's not just the August heat that you're feeling. It is heat coming off of this widely unknown commission. All right, we're going to switch gears here. And after this short break, we're going to talk about the Detroit mayoral primary results with WDET's own Russ McNamara. Stick around.
Welcome back to MichMash. We are joined now by Russ McNamara, WDET's own All Things Considered host and reporter who has been following the Detroit elections, which of course had their primary this week. Russ, welcome to MichMash.
Hey, Zach. Happy to be here as usual.
So, Russ, this was a big week in Detroit politics with the Tuesday primary election. I think we got to start with the mayoral primary. That was the big one. So going into the election, who in your mind were the main candidates to be in that top 2 in advance to November? And how did things look as they were going in?
It always seemed like Mary Sheffield, especially over the past couple of years, was being groomed as the heir apparent to Mike Duggan. And nothing in the run-up to this election swayed my opinion on that. And then nothing in the results would shake that either. So that was the main story, essentially, for that. Then, as for who was coming second, it was interesting because you have Solomon Kinloch, a local pastor, no political experience, except in the way that Detroit pastors are always kind of a little bit mixed in with politics, but this is, the first outright pastor we've seen in a very, very long time. And then you have Santil Jenkins, a former Detroit City Council president herself, turned nonprofit CEO. So that was interesting. And did she still have the mojo to jump up into that second spot? It was close, but Solomon Kinloch, with that built-in base of parishioners, ended up coming through. It was pretty tight for a while, but yeah, overall, he was able to outlast Jenkins.
The thing that really I think has jumped out at people is that Sheffield cleared 50%. Was that your sense all the way along? I mean, it was pretty well known she was the front runner to be the top vote getter, but was that the sense in the city that Sheffield was likely to have this commanding margin? I think Solomon Kinloch, he was in around 17% or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not like that Mary Sheffield is unliked across Detroit. There was just, if this was ranked choice voting, it would probably be even more of a rout, honestly. And so people had their preferences, but Mary Sheffield has been doing this a very, very long time. She knows the ins and outs of Detroit politics. She's got the historic name of Sheffield behind her. So therefore, name recognition was already high, and some people took their shots. But her surpassing 50%, not a surprise at all.
Interesting. So for our listeners, can you give us both the broad strokes of who Mary Sheffield and Solomon Kinloch are and how their visions for the city are similar or different?
Mary Sheffield's been doing this a very long time. I mean, she was quite young when she first started on Detroit City Council, and she has worked her way. She had been there as long as Mike Duggan has been mayor. So she is incredibly savvy in both messaging and her politics. And if you wanted the closest analog to Duggan in this entire race, she was it. And so she knows what's going on. She was able to, pull out all the stops and bring on some bigger names. I mean, I think she showed up at the polls with Greg Mathis. So she knows how to work Detroit politics pretty well. Solomon Kinloch essentially came out of nowhere. Sam Robinson from Detroit 1 Million did a great job in sniffing out his potential political aspirations. And so he was able to kind of call it. And Kinloch, he'd been working with the city going back to the COVID-19 pandemic and, involving his parishioners and being a beacon and a source for people outside of his own parishioners in helping out the community during the pandemic. And then, surprisingly, the United Auto Workers Union made their endorsement of Kinloch. Which kind of bucked, some of the trends, some of the conventional thinking of who they might support. Fred Durhal certainly could have been supported by the UAW. Santil Jenkins certainly could have been supported by the UAW. But in the poll, it was Kinloch who came away with that endorsement, and it was big for him. But it's not like Mary Sheffield shied away from her own union support through SEIU and others.
So usually when you have an executive like a mayor or a governor that's not running again, as is the case here with Mayor Duggan declining to seek a fourth term, potential successors will talk about change. I'm the change candidate, trying to offer voters something they feel they didn't get from the outgoing leader. But that doesn't feel like that's what this cycle has been like, because Mayor Duggan's pretty popular in the city still, isn't it? You just mentioned that Council President Sheffield, if anything, is the closest to Duggan in the field.
Any criticism was very tepid. Nobody really took a shot at Duggan. I think part of it is that popularity, The other part is that he is making that bid for governor. So you don't want to tick off the guy that you're going to have to go to anyway, potentially down the line, because you're not entirely sure of how that's going to shake out a year from now. So nobody really wanted to bite the hand that fed them. And they were quiet in their criticism. Solomon Kinloch, he didn't have a lot in the way of policy. The couple of times I talked to him, he just kind of said, the city needs to come together, build more housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mary Sheffield, when I talked with her, she said that she was more compassionate. Maybe that's where she could separate herself from Mike Duggan. It's not, Duggan was not compassionate. However, he was never really like a true man of the people, I guess, but he was very tight with the business community. And built the city that way instead. But he was, it's a different sort of politician, different sort of politicking. But not a lot of separation, and nobody really wanted to take some shots at the king.
So we mentioned, Mary Sheffield got about 51% of the vote. Solomon Kinloch, by virtue of his getting 17%, made him number 2. And so they're the ones that advance. But, I think some people might be confused why, after a primary, one candidate actually gets a majority of the votes, like Sheffield did. They still have to face the second place finisher in the November general election. Does Kinloch have any hope here? I mean, usually when you're the second place finisher, you're hoping the first place finisher is somewhere in the 35 to 40% range, and you try to consolidate the vote from people who voted for any of the other 7 candidates. But Sheffield already, she wins a majority. What can Kinloch possibly do here?
I don't know. Because it's an interesting position to be in as a man of faith, as a pastor. You wouldn't expect him to start taking shots, right? And would that turn off some of his potential voters if he starts taking shots at Sheffield? I don't know. It's going to be tight. Now, Santiel Jenkins, I think, could have done that. I think there was already, some tit for tat and some tense confrontations between Sheffield and Jenkins. But now Kinloch is in that position where he has to go after her. He has to attack her on her record or her character. There's already been some opposition research that dug up a potential spousal abuse, domestic violence charge against Kinloch in the past. Not exactly sure who dug that up and, kind of leaked that to the press. But, there was a reason it was out there. But if you talk to people within his campaign and other political watchers, that didn't necessarily hurt him. This is a city that voted for Coleman Young and Kwame Kilpatrick. Mike Duggan had his own personal issues while in office, and it didn't affect him a blink. So this happening, 30 plus years ago, didn't really bother him. But now that that's on the table, you really can't go after him for it because it's out there and seemingly no one really cares about it.
I'll be curious to see if Kinloch can find a way to grow the voter pie, so to speak. The Free Press has done some good reporting. Others have done some good reporting about how turnout in Detroit municipal elections has really fallen. That would seem to suggest that, if I were in the Kinloch campaign, they've got to be thinking about trying to find these low propensity voters and convincing them to get re-engaged. Because if it's just going to be the typical universe of Detroit voters, boy, it's hard to see how Sheffield loses this. Now, what about you mentioned?
There is the way of get out the vote method, which is typically in Detroit through the church. The NAACP likes to call it the souls to the polls, right? So, if anybody knows how to work his connections within the Detroit church network, it would be Solomon Kinloch. So that's maybe his ace in the hole for right now.
You mentioned Mayor Duggan a little bit earlier with his decision not to seek re-election and candidates being reticent about criticizing him if maybe they're mayor one day and he's governor. But how did his decision mix up the mayor's race this year, if at all? Any unique factors there?
Not really. With everybody announcing that they're running for governor so early, Zach, you've seen this. I've had people come to me. It's like, is the governor's race this year? Because people are so confused. And so, Duggan, while, clearly on his way out in this final year, my goodness, that has kind of, allowed people to just roll with it for now. And, if any criticism of Duggan comes up, it probably won't happen until we see how the governor's race shakes out, where people might say, well, he could have done this a little bit better. He could have done this a little bit better. Or, there's still, plenty of blight within the city. Or, well, too much of downtown is owned by one person, stuff like that. But yeah, nobody has taken a shot. And I wouldn't expect that to change over the next 3 months.
So let's talk about the Detroit City Council, because, of course, there was a primary there, too. And I think there were maybe 2 or 3 pretty important races that were winnowing fields, because you had more than 2 credible candidates and only the top 2 can advance. So what stood out to you in these city council races?
Council District 7. Fred Durhal decided to run for mayor, was not successful in getting in top 2. So that left his district open, and that allowed for State Rep Karen Whitsett to run. And she was in the top 2. And she caucused with the Republicans during lame duck. There was that whole controversy. And now she's facing off a Democratic socialist in Denzel McCampbell, the former PR person for Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. So that is stark contrast. It'll be interesting to see how the money flows into that race. I talked to Denzel about a week and a half ago, and he said he'd knocked on 10,000 doors. He'd managed to hit like most every single door in his district. And still, that margin was pretty tight. So Whitsett does have pretty good name recognition in that district. But these will be 2 people who are not afraid to take some shots. And that might be the most entertaining race as far as city council.
Whitsett is always a figure that generates a lot of interest in Lansing, where she's a state representative. She got here with the strong support of Mayor Duggan when she first won office, but has been known for allying, like you said, with the Republicans on some key things. And maybe no one was more responsible for bringing what was a Democratic majority in the House to its knees at the end of last year. Whereas, Denzel McCampbell, he works for Progress. He's, I think, managing director of Progress Michigan, which is a progressive organization. And I'm going to be really interested, like you said, to see where the money goes here, because I wonder if there will be a push to try to get McCampbell elected to the council and keep Whitsett out of there. Or if maybe some folks wouldn't mind if she was not in the state capitol anymore and just fine at the legislature. That's going to be interesting, because I believe you had McCampbell at about 34% and Whitsett maybe at 33%. I might have the numbers a little off there, with a
Pretty
third
close
candidate getting the rest. How does that shake out, you think, as the 2 of them advance? Does one of them have a leg up in trying to appeal to the others, or does that just remain to be seen?
I think Whitsett definitely has more name recognition, for sure. That certainly would help. I don't know how she will do once people really start talking about lame duck, because, in Detroit, there's certainly a sense where you can, among the voters, where you don't necessarily follow the day-to-day of what's happening in Lansing, even when Joe Tate was speaker. So, there's that angle. And so there's going to be some extra money thrown into this race, just because I think Whitsett will be able to draw some extra cash from maybe some conservatives. In the meantime, Denzel McCampbell knows how to raise money from leftists, and was drawing money from all over the country, even in his primary race. So I don't know. There's going to be some extra money in this where we might not necessarily see it in other council member races.
Well, Russ, thanks so much for joining us on MichMash. Really appreciate your insight, and going to look forward to hearing more as the November election approaches.
Zach, you guys at Gongwer are the best. Thanks a lot.